I wanted to say something a little bit about Karuna. Um, before that, um, so the Buddhism. One of the really beautiful teachings of the Buddha are it's called the divine abodes, the Brahma Vihara. That's the fancy term. Brahma Vihara, which actually means pretty much divine homes, abodes. And so the last month, the March teachers at the Forest Refuge were teaching the divine abodes. So if you were doing you could continue doing whatever your practice was, vipassana or whatever. But if you wanted to practice the four transcendental states, the divine abodes, you could do that part. And all of their Dharma talks were on the divine abodes. And so I thought I would maybe do a little talk on that sometime. Maybe I will, and maybe I won't. But I thought today is kind of for those of you who are Reformed Christians or refugees from Christianity, perhaps, or whatever, or just good old plain old Christians. Today is Easter, isn't it? And I just kind of missed that. I mean, really, it just kind of crept up on me. But I do think that if any religion's got a corner on the market of Karuna, I actually would say it's Christianity. Karuna means compassion, and so the passion of the crucifixion of Jesus is well known to Christians. But I thought I would just say a few things because we don't talk about Karuna very much. We talk about metta, right? Metta is what we talk about. And we all like metta a lot. I'm not so wild. I was thinking about Karuna, and I thought, in my family of origin, that's what a psychologist says. I like that. In my family of origin, I don't think Karuna was very... I don't think that there was a whole lot of Karuna in our family. We had some metta, but Karuna was not exactly just dripping off the walls. Karuna, compassion. Do you know what passion means? The Latin, you remember? Does anyone know what passion is? Suffering. So compassion is with suffering. The ability to be with suffering. Probably there's more than one family here who maybe was not so up on compassion. With suffering. So it's probably really trite to say that Buddhism maybe is a little bit more focused on metta, loving kindness, and Christianity may be more focused on compassion. I don't know that that's true, but I really don't. But it is certainly true that the Catholic Church has certainly been, in terms of, you think of Mother Teresa, obviously. If that's not compassion, I don't know what compassion would be. But it has had an enormous outreach in terms of the suffering and the poor and the weak. It really has. So let's just face facts. I mean, the orphanages, and for all of the inevitable unskillful behavior of all systems. You can't have a system without having unskillful behavior. It's not possible. Isn't that sad? And Lord knows the Catholics have a corner on some of that in terms of the priest running around molesting children. But that's not to say that the Catholic Church and Christianity has had enormously beneficial work in terms of the poor and the needy and helping suffering people. And, historically, Buddhism was so much more really kind of away from the tendency was for the monks and the nuns to be somewhat separate, and the community supported them. So it's not quite the same. Maybe that's why metta is a little bit more associated with Buddhism. I probably would get in so much trouble if, probably Buddhists would probably get mad. That's not very Buddhist to get mad. So that's why I was pausing on that. But I did want to say that, so there was this one story, one of the teachers, she worked in a hospice, and she's a quite wonderful person in Australia. And she was telling this story of sitting with someone who was dying. And it sounded, I think it was maybe a rather remarkable woman that she was describing her, and been very active and very assertive, and she was, in her last week, she was having a difficult time. And so the person was sitting with her, and maybe, imagine, day after day, and maybe reading to her, and being with her in a very wonderful way, and maybe in a very metta way. You could think of metta in a way. I said this to the beginners. We did the metta chant, and I suggested to people as we chanted it at the end. You remember already? That metta is it's like being a friend to yourself. Being the friend that maybe you would want to have outside. We've always wanted to have a best friend, but metta is, number one, befriending your own self. And then from that, befriending others. So she's sitting with this person in the hospice and befriending her and maybe reading to her. And she said that it was really clear that the person was really, in fact, she was very, very sad. The woman was lying in the bed, and she was very sad. And maybe she was becoming acutely aware of what was happening. And she said suddenly, someone new, a nurse came to the door, and it was maybe like someone that she didn't know, was kind of new on the job. And she said this kind of starchily dressed nurse came to the door and looked in, and she said, and she just marched across the room very assertively, right? I can imagine myself thinking, oh God, she marched across the room, she went to the person's bed, she got in bed and grabbed her and held her in her arms. That's Karuna. Karuna is, that daring to breach boundaries and just get in bed. And she said the person just put her head in her arms. And it's wonderful, isn't it? It's a wonderful story. I think there are times in my own life when I have not allowed myself to make that step across the boundary where you just put your arms around someone and cradle them in your arms, metaphorically, if not in reality. So that's Karuna, that's compassion. Compassion is with suffering, being with suffering. And it's, I don't know about you, but it's not my strongest suit. It just isn't. It's not that I don't have it, but it's not my strongest suit. And I loved that story. Thinking about standing at the doorway and looking at someone and absolutely knowing what they needed. They didn't need, you to read to them. They didn't need a beautiful poem. They didn't need you to hold their hand. They needed you to hold them. I remember when I was interning as a therapist, I led a group of children of divorced parents. And back those days, I had hair. And I had one of those little ponytails that I used to put in a little, whatever you call it, with a little ribbon. Not a ribbon, a little band, and rubber band. And the children just loved it. They just loved it. They would come and pull on it. Right? They were little things. And so I remember that they always wanted to sit in my lap. They just always wanted to sit in my lap. So they, so here I'd be on the floor, sitting like this, really. And so there'd be one here sitting in my lap, and there'd be one here pulling my hair. And then about 10 of them wildly running all over the place. And at one point, my supervisor left me a note and asked me if I would have a talk with her. And so she said, you can't let them sit in your lap. I found that I was very shocked at first. I said, oh, why? And she said, well, because of all of the sexual the incidences of children being molested. So male teachers should not allow little girls to sit in their lap. So our society, right? It's like, let's just think about, so standing at the door and you see someone lying in bed and you have this instinct to go wrap. My God, you could get sued for sexual harassment in our society. It's really true. So it's a very sad thing that we've learned to be extremely cautious with boundaries. We've learned to to be very careful. And the other thing I wanted to say is that if you're thinking about compassion and karuna, you can have some people have almost no boundaries, and they can get almost drowned, in jumping in and trying to be with people and trying to help, and because they don't have really enough boundaries to even to take care of themselves. Because there is some way that the only way that you can really take care and help someone is that you don't get lost in their suffering. There has to. I think that's probably why equanimity is so important. You have to have a measure of equanimity. And if you don't, you would get completely drowned in the suffering of others. And then the opposite of that, right, is that your boundaries are so firm and so and to some extent your heart is so protected that you really can't get to that feeling, that you can't get to that place of compassion and karuna for others. And the third thing is the amount of suffering in this world. It's just unbelievable, isn't it? So where does it begin and where does it end? Your willingness to open your heart. But I just wanted to share that with you, that we chant loving kindness every Sunday, right? And we talk about loving kindness, and I love loving kindness. And we don't chant, karuna. May I in some way help mitigate your suffering. I've just made that up, but that's an example. And I think for me, it's very useful. It's been useful to think about the moments that I might have not stepped in the room towards somebody suffering. I might have stayed at the door and been a little bit distant. Give them some metta. Right? Give them a little metta, but perhaps not karuna. And so maybe you want to think about that, right? The divine abodes includes karuna, compassion. The other two are None of these are my strong suits. The one I'm really going to give a talk on is mudita, is sympathetic joy. Having sympathetic joy for the accomplishments of others, particularly those people that you don't like. Now there's a real test, right? I mean, it's like, does anybody, do you know anybody, I mean, is there anybody in here who has any issues with envy? Does anybody have any issues with envy? No, not me, right? But see, because mudita is precisely that, it's just exactly at envy, right? At working with that envy, the capacity to have joy, absolute joy for the accomplishment of other people. For us, I think, it's almost like the accomplishment of other people is like taking, it's like it's costing me. It's sort of like it's a, it's a big pie, and if they got a piece of it, I don't have it. Anyway, so that's karuna. Metta, karuna, mudita, which is sympathetic joy, and upekkha. And equanimity, upekkha, is actually the glue. The other three really reside on equanimity. If you ain't got equanimity, you're going to be in a lot of trouble with any of these, right? And that would be, as I said, for sure, don't try to be Mother Teresa if you don't have any equanimity.